Welcome back to the Convo Couch, ladies and gentlemen. I am Pasta Jardula, and spinning on those ones and twos late night is Jonny Tsunami. Today with us in the studio, we have a regular guest now. This is his fourth time with us. He is a foreign policy junkie just like me. We love him. He's here. Mark Sleboda's in the house. How you doing over there, Mark?
Hey, Pasta. I'm alive. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Mark,
It is always an honor and a pleasure to be on the Convo Couch with you. And shout out Jonny Tsunami, who keeps us connected.
you're going to have to go back and do that again. You're the only person who says the conversation couch. I love it when you do that. I was waiting for that.
Sorry.
Well, I'm glad you can join us, man, because there's a lot of great things. And I don't want to say a lot of great things going on, but there's a lot of things happening in the world. Foreign policy has been heating up this week. We've had a lot of electoral stuff going on in the States, but man, there's unrest going on in Iraq. There's unrest going on in Lebanon. But we had some stuff. Let's do some unpacking to start off the show, because right here on this show, you said, and I quoted to you, I said, it seems like the protesters in Hong Kong are taking notes from the protesters in Kiev. And you told me here on this show that they were actually showing them film and footage of what happened on the Maidan in Kiev in 2014. Well, guess what? Guess who showed up in Hong Kong?
Azov.
Oh, there they are. And they weren't like hiding it all. They were putting it all over their Facebook. They were bragging about it. They showed on up. Mark, how did you know?
You just pay attention. First of all, the Hong Kong protesters, their violent tactics, trying to instigate the government, usually failing to greater violence, it is, and their use of continuous, Johnny, tsunamis of Molotov cocktails and fire bombs and do-it-yourself weapons, archers, and metal rods, and do-it-yourself catapults and everything else. I mean, it's right out of the Maidan's playbook. Further, they were literally showing propaganda videos about the 2014 putsch in Ukraine to the people, and the Hong Kong protesters were out there, forming message lines about Ukraine and flying Ukrainian flags, so that the connection was obvious. But now it went one step further when literal neo-Nazis, and that is what Azov are. Look them up, right? Yep. And even Western journalists, when pressed, will admit, they're fascists and neo-Nazis, but they're not representative. No, they're just funded by the oh-so-liberal government of Ukraine and armed by the oh-so-liberal government of Ukraine and sent into Ukraine's schools to teach little school kids their ideology and how to field strip weapons, right? I mean, that's what liberal governments do with neo-Nazis. Now they've showed up in Hong Kong to cheer on another protest movement that also just coincidentally happens to be openly backed by the United States and is billed as a pro-democracy, pro-freedom, pro-rainbows and unicorns movement, but is actually a lot more complicated. It's nativist. It's more importantly, a government that the U.S. is not aligned with U.S. foreign policy interests. And they resort to the most undemocratic tactics that quite literally fit the bill of terrorism, of trying to scare people into agreeing with them politically. Yep. In Hong Kong, it's with attacks on every civilian who happens to disagree with them, any mainland Chinese that they stumble across, and ripping apart their metro system, their public utilities, their streets, everything, in order to bring the economy down, to try to force the authorities of Hong Kong, the Hong Kong government, to fill their demands. And The unfortunate thing is they seem to really have won in a way.
Well, yeah, they have one because they have the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act 2019 version, where they've even removed language which allows them to get away from with violent acts, and then they can just retreat and get out of Hong Kong, go to the mainland, go to U.S. and avoid any prosecution whatsoever. They were actually bragging about having that language removed from this version of the bill. And have you seen the video of the young man, just the recent one, where he was cleaning up the road and he got hit right over the head with the metal pipe? I mean, these are the tactics that we see every day. This is disgusting.
No. It's not just bad apples or isolated incident. If you pay attention, and you have to pay attention online because none of this is shown in the mainstream media coverage, right? It's never going to be shown on MSNBC or CNN or even Fox or anything like that. You really have to follow people who filter through this stuff, who speak local Mandarin and Chinese, the other languages that are involved, and have ears on the ground, because otherwise you won't ever find out what the real nature of things. And you don't have to take my word for it. Again, follow some of the people that I'm watching who are there, and like Carl Jha, and who we've mentioned on the show before, and watch the videos for yourself.
Yeah,
and watch how many of them there are and what the nature of this is. That it is not. It's cloaked in the rhetoric of democracy and freedom and liberalism and all this thing, but it's actually nativist. It's extremely anti-mainland Chinese, and these people are openly, begging for invasion by Trump of U.S. forces, for the reinstitution of British colonial rule over Hong Kong, flying Hong Kong colonial flags. And what they're protesting about is an extradition bill, when that murderers have literally gotten off because no extradition exists between China, Hong Kong, and Taiwan, and China and Hong Kong at least are supposedly part of the same country. Hong Kong has an extradition bill with the United States, but not with their own country, China. Well, and when that's doubled down when U.S. NGOs, U.S. NGOs, mainstream Washington NGOs, the Cato Institute. The Cato Institute partners with a British and a European partners, and they put out a yearly human freedom index. And Hong Kong already is it with some either number one or another year it's 2 or 3, but that is like 15 places above the United States.
Yeah,
right?
no.
They have very substantial freedoms in Hong Kong. Yeah. They have elections. They're not direct elections, but the U.S. doesn't have direct elections either. Well, half the parliament is directly elected. The other half is done through unions and so forth. Well, but they have they do have a representative, a substantially democratic political system in Hong Kong, and they have a very moderate local government with far too much autonomy, if you ask me, that has responded to these protests with so much patience, far too much patience, in my mind, and leniency, that I do not believe that the protesters have legitimate demands, beyond the rhetoric. And the fact that they're posing alongside, their leaders are posing alongside Pompeo and Nancy Pelosi, and the others, which the U.S. would surely call meddling if it was done to them.
Marco Rubio,
the
aficionado of Bolivia, of the regime change playbook, himself. Now he shows up with this character, Jeremy Wong, I believe his name is, and they call themselves the Hong Kong, the HKDC, the Hong Kong Democracy Council, and it's loaded on their advisory board with all members from the NED. It's right there in the open, yet you have people like Nancy Pelosi going on there, mentioning Tibet, talking about mainland China doing something, which I think let's take our hats off to Xi Jinping on holding his patience and not going in there. Because if I was Xi Jinping, I would have been over there already. The way these protesters, with the air quotes, are acting, this is anything but a geopolitical adversary fencing off against Beijing, and it ain't gonna fool anybody. And the thing that really drives me crazy is that our Congress is just. I mean, we had one guy. I'm gonna bring up a real tweet real quick. His name was Thomas Massey. We found one guy who said, "I voted no tonight on the UIGHR, which is UIGHUR Act, sanctions against China, for the same reason I voted no in the Hong Kong bill 2 weeks ago. When our government meddles in internal affairs of foreign countries, it invites those governments to meddle in our affairs." I mean, now that might not be the best analogy of what's really going on in China, but at least it's saying, hey, let's stop messing around in these other countries' business.
I got to disagree with you there completely, Pasta.
Well, tell me.
And Marco Rubio laid it out perfectly for us because Rubio said that the U.S. relations with Hong Kong is U.S. internal affairs. And China, even though Hong Kong, I'm pretty sure it's part of China, China trying to stop the U.S. Or even complaining about the U.S. supporting these riots. They're not protests, they're riots in Hong Kong, is meddling in U.S. internal affairs. Because hashtag we are the world, right?
Got it.
I mean, and so China, which has not sent its police or its military into autonomous Hong Kong, is meddling in U.S. internal affairs when the U.S. is openly backing riots in a Hong Kong city.
Yeah. Well, I didn't look at it that way. Beijing needs to stop messing in with our affairs. So I got it straight now and stuff. Let's get on to the next subject.
Beijing needs to stop meddling in Chinese affairs. I guess is
that the better way to put it? Well, yeah. I thought we are the world, so Hong Kong is us. Stop messing with us. Let's talk about. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Hold on 1 second on the China thing, because I think that the Chinese government has made huge mistakes here, and I think that the one country, two systems policy, of which Hong Kong autonomy is based on since 1997, enshrined in the Hong Kong Charter, is broken. And there were recently, in the last couple of weeks, there were local elections in Hong Kong. Not for anything important, right? But they were viewed widely as a referendum on the protests and the government and what's going on. And the Hong Kong authorities lost substantially. The pro-democracy parties supported by the Hong Kong oligarchs and of course by the United States, the leaders of these parties are frequently shuttling back and forth, just like the protest leaders in the U.S. are with DC. They won nearly 60% of the vote, and that has to be taken into account. And these protests have been radicalized. They have been weaponized by the U.S. as a tool of U.S. foreign policy in its ongoing, Cold War with China, its economic war with China. But China has lost the hearts and minds, if they ever had them, of the people of Hong Kong. And it's because the two systems, one country policy has failed. Part of the Hong Kong Charter, and that is the basis of this, explicitly says that foreign countries are not permitted to do political activity in Hong Kong. I mean, exactly what the U.S., the National Endowment for Democracy, the U.K. is doing. And that Hong Kong citizens, with the freedoms that they've been granted, that, you know, the elections and everything that not everyone in China enjoys as part of the two systems, one country rule, then are not supposed to cooperate with foreign countries wanting to do political activity. And obviously that is completely going on, and China is still sitting off from this and not interfering and letting the Hong Kong authorities sink or swim when countries like the U.S. and U.K. are not playing by the rules that were agreed to in the 1997 turnover and the Hong Kong Charter. And I'm going to tell you one of the real reasons why this was all kicked off over the issue of an extradition bill. Do you know who is really scared of this extradition bill? The people that really hold power in Hong Kong, the Hong Kong oligarchs. That control
the Jimmy Lai guys, and
Martin Lee, Jimmy
Lai,
that they control the real estate, they control parts of the privatized transportation and electrical system. They're the real money and power in Hong Kong, and they are afraid of being extradited to mainland China, where they don't have power over the courts and the legal system like they do in China. And they have long been the ones sponsoring protest movements. They sponsored the first umbrella revolution in Hong Kong years ago. They're completely behind this now. The U.S., the NED are behind it too, but also a huge, substantial part of the money and the organization comes from these and they're afraid of being held account to a legal and a judicial system that they don't have complete control over. They're really scared of the extradition bill, and that's why they used this issue to drive their, unfortunately, radicalized, weaponized youth with their control of the newspapers and the media system in Hong Kong. They're really driving this, and I'm afraid that a substantial portion of it all is their personal corrupt interests in this.
Okay, let's break this down for a second. What could have Xi Jinping done at this particular point? Because I always thought that he was showing a good form of mental constraint by not going in there, because I thought if he would go in there, politically to the world, he would look like a madman. He would look like a dictator, an authoritarian government going onto Hong Kong ground, land, trying to enact martial law. I mean, I don't know. Maybe you can give me a better explanation for it. But what could have been done, and what can we hope to be done moving forward now? Saying that all is lost, right? It's too late.
First of all, he could have prevented years ago. He should have prevented these U.S. gongos, right? Government organized, non-governmental organizations like the National Endowment for Democracy and the National Democratic Institute, equivalent, everything. Same from the UK. Should have prevented them from working in Hong Kong. Right? Okay. It's actually in the Hong Kong Charter that they're not supposed to be doing there. That would have stopped a lot of this from happening. They should have encouraged the local authorities to challenge the Hong Kong oligarchs' control over the media and their corruption of the judicial and the political system years ago, and stopped their open treason with figures in the United States that helped them. The U.S. Congress. They didn't do that. So that was the first. I think that is the root cause of all of this.
Okay.
And they should have learned from that, because they should have seen this done in Ukraine, in Georgia, in Lebanon, countless other countries through the years. And they had too much faith in the Hong Kong authorities' ability to control things while all of this open infection was allowed to carry on and continue. Second of all, yeah, I do think at the point where these protesters, they've killed one, uh, they've injured countless people, beating people on the street with metal rods just for speaking Mandarin, Chinese with a mainland accent on the streets, destroying metro stations, blocking roads, blocking the airport. Airports are usually considered national security things. They certainly are in the United States. Yeah, he should have sent Chinese police, even the People's Liberation Army, in to restore order. Would he have been called authoritarian and a terrible dictator and everything else? Yeah, well, he's already being called that anyway, right? They always are. I think it would have been the correct response. I think he did need to restore law and order to Hong Kong. And the protests and riots and destruction are still going on today.
Yeah.
I mean, they just discovered overnight another 3,800 Molotov cocktails stashed in the university, ready, to throw on police and subway stations and police stations and everything else. Right? Yeah. Those aren't protesters. That's an insurgency.
Can Xi Jinping make a move now? Is it still? I mean, the way you're talking, you're making it sound like it's too late. I mean, isn't there still a little time now that we've had the America make its move with the Hong Kong Democracy and Human Rights Act? Can Xi Jinping make a move now and restore some order in there, lock some people up, maybe bring Jimmy Lai to the mainland, really put his foot down now that America has made that move?
They could do that, but it's been pretty obvious that China intends to follow the charter and not overtly interfere in Hong Kong affairs. And with the Hong Kong authorities, they're the parties in power in Hong Kong, seeming to have lost the local elections. I think they are really going to do a reassessment and maybe give in to some of the protesters' further demands beyond the withdrawing of the extradition bill, what was long ago. They're hoping to mollify the protests at this point, which is only going to encourage them further, unfortunately. Even if the immediate protests die down, the movement and the political power, the capital they will have gained from having seen one, is further going to erode Hong Kong. And unfortunately, I think Hong Kong is not going to break away from China or anything like that. That's not going to happen. But increasingly, I think China will just begin to kind of cordon off Hong Kong and say, all right, whatever, you're still part of us, but we're not going to pay any attention to you anymore. And that would have been a big problem for China a couple decades ago when it was a major export area for the Chinese economy. But what was 23% of Chinese exports is now down to about 2.3% of the Chinese economy going through Hong Kong. And if they can redirect China's energy and business, further to other ports, I think that's what they will be doing. And it's only Hong Kong economy that is going to suffer from this, and no small part of it will have been inflicted, purposefully, with stated intent by this insurgency in order to try to bring down the Hong Kong local government.
What does the United States gain from their move? What does Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer and all these people who are so, still talking about Tibet and saying the authoritarian government, when we've seen, like we've just talked about, no move by Xi Jinping to even go in there to let Hong Kong be Hong Kong and wither at the vine? What does America gain by this?
Destabilization. The whole goal here, I mean, obviously, the U.S. isn't going to march in and liberate Hong Kong, right? They're not going to fly in and occupy Xinjiang, right?
Yeah.
It's not going to happen. The whole purpose of this is to destabilize China. You find, it's right out of the unconventional warfare manual of the U.S. military. You find the ethno-political and religious divisions and fractures in a country, and you exploit them as weapons of U.S. foreign policy in order to destabilize and weaken your opponent. And they're doing that with the Uyghurs in Western China.
Yep.
They're doing it with Hong Kong. They'll do it every since way they can. And, eventually, these kids could be tossed to the wolves, right? But
Yeah.
that won't bother them, because the greater goal is to destabilize China. That's it.
Yeah.
And yes, that is poking the dragon. That is continually poking the dragon. It is increasing tensions. It is increasing the Cold War. It is increasing the possibility of a hot war against China
That's
in the
what I'm
South
talking about,
China
Mark.
Sea, Taiwan Straits.
This is making me nervous
they're okay
here.
with that.
This is making me nervous. Even Nancy Pelosi mentioned the Uyghurs, which we learned on this show that there's Wahhabist caliphates in Xinjiang, in West China, which eventually comes back to who? Us, the United States of America, who's been propping up this monarchy government in Saudi Arabia, which spreads their Wahhabism around the world. And it's disgusting that none of our leaders even have a clue what's going on. You see Chuck Schumer, he's still red baiting on the Senate floor, and Nancy Pelosi with this rhetoric towards China. It's like this is another nuclear power here, ladies and gentlemen. And it's kind of funny. I don't know if you follow my Twitter. If you don't, I made a little video. I had to cut it down to 2 minutes and 19 seconds. And I just want to close this out, Mark, because, I get into a lot of arguments with a lot of people about China. And I'm not sitting here and saying that Xi Jinping is the best leader on the face of the earth and the Chinese government is the best way to go. But I've always been afraid of something like this happening, of us saber rattling with China. And I've always said we have to stop talking about how evil they are, how authoritarian they are, because they use the same language in Congress to manufacture consent to do what they need to do. So, I mean, I put this little video up, Mark. When you get a chance, take a look at it. It just explains what you did. We cut it down about how the people of China, what's going on, the poor people that have been lifted up from poverty. But I don't even know what to do anymore because, I'm sick and tired of fighting with people about, because they say, oh, you know what? You wouldn't be able to do the CONVO couch in China. I said, that's not the point. The point is that we're always going to continue to manufacture consent and things like this could happen. And you just said here on this show that this could lead to a hot war. Can it not?
No, not only can, it will, and they want it to. Listen closely to what Pentagon officials and America's thinkers are when they're testifying in front of congressional committees. They believe that a naval conflict with China, not off the coast of the United States or Hawaii, but in the South China Sea or the Taiwan Straits, in the near to medium future is inevitable.
Jesus.
Because they need to contain China, right? That's part of this whole containment China sphere. They believe it is inevitable, and they would rather fight the near future than the medium future. Why? Because China's Navy is growing more powerful with every passing year. Their ability to fight off U.S. carriers, right, with short and intermediate range missiles and the host of drones, their own carriers, what they're developing becomes more and more substantial. And the ability of the U.S. To have full spectrum dominance over that area is failing. They've got Russian S-400 air defense systems now. They're developing their own stealth drones and bombers. This is why the U.S. really pulled out of the intermediate range nuclear weapons treaty, not because of Russian violations, but because they want to put land-based intermediate range missiles in Guam and Japan for this coming conflict with China, because they view conventional, right, to start, right, because they view China as having a missile advantage because China's not a party to this treaty. This is all gearing near to this conflict, and they want to fight it sooner rather than later because every passing year that they wait, China gets more and more capability to win that conflict.
Yeah.
Now, that should scare you.
So what do we do, Mark? I mean, is my quest to prove that the Chinese people, the Chinese government isn't as evil as everybody says it is, just falling on deaf ears? Or should I continue just to say, hey, man, we have to look at sometimes these other governments, the way they pull people out of poverty? Because as a progressive, I thought, poverty was our number one enemy. And here I look and I see Xi Jinping and I see Narendra Modi, two people who've been demonized in the United States because of political reasons, actually pulling people out of poverty. I mean, I don't even know where we go nowadays. And I'm lost at it because I don't know what to do, because this is exactly what I feared. And what you just said is seriously scary right now. And it's not only a possibility, it almost seems inevitable at this point.
Now, what you want to do is find yourself one of those good old 1950s nuclear bunkers, right?
Got it.
In the backyards. You want to renovate it out, and you want to start stocking it up.
Got it. God. Oh, well. Hey, that was a great segment. Let's get on to the next thing. I can talk about this all day. To be continued, Mark. We'll continue to follow this, and as you're continuing to come on the show, we'll continue to peek our eyes and ears, and, hey, maybe something positive could happen. I mean, at this point, I'd like to see Xi Jinping make a move and restore some law and order in there. I hate what's going on. These aren't protests. These are riots, and it's disgusting. And now that Azov has showed up, it's bad.
It's always the same story. There are, of course, peaceful protesters there. Yeah, they're in large numbers. And the rioters operate out of the peaceful protesters to conduct their thing. The police go after the rioters brought back, and the police are left facing peaceful protesters. If you are a peaceful protester, you have to separate yourself politically and physically from people who do violence. If you don't, then you're simply acting as a reservoir for them to operate out of. Now, U.S. police say the same thing in the United States, right? But that doesn't apply, of course, to these countries because we're behind this whole thing. But our police put that responsibility on the peaceful protesters. But that's not a concern when it comes to other countries.
The chat's heating up over here. Some people are talking about Tulsi Gabbard here. Let me tell you something. I asked Tulsi Gabbard this first. She didn't even know what was going on in China when I told her about the nefarious acts of the NED. She just got back from her 2 weeks of deployment, and she says, let me look into that and I'll see. And she's actually seen some of the information that we kind of presented when we asked her about the NED. And it's if you're paying attention, it's easy to see this stuff. It's not hiding. I mean, the Gray Zone did a great article. I think was it Ajit Singh? A great article on this, and it just lays it out, the whole advisory board. It's disgusting. We need to stop interfering. I don't know. Maybe we'll see the people of Hong Kong, the non-violent people, maybe they'll protest against the people who are being violent. I've seen a little bit of action like that happen. So maybe we have an uprising of the peaceful people, hold law and order there. I don't know. I'm just hoping for anything at this point.
It would be nice.
Let's talk about Lebanon and let's talk about Iraq, because I don't know, and you guys were laughing at me because I was saying they are dancing in Iraq, and not that I want to see violence, not that I want to see situations like this, but I get excited if I see a real revolution, because we talk about these fugazi revolutions. We're talking about one in Hong Kong. Yes, there are some people protesting with legitimate reasons, but then the NED comes in and it's hijacked by American influence. What's going on in Iraq, and what the hell is going on in Lebanon? How did it happen? How did we get here? And where do we go moving forward? Let's do it.
Okay, to summarize real quick before we get any started is basically, I mean, I wouldn't be so happy from sitting from the United States and seeing people dance in the streets over this because to a large extent, big picture wise, the situation, the local context is different, but the exact same thing is happening. Local protests with legitimate local demands where the U.S. is stepping in and trying to move these protests and exploit them in a direction that will benefit U.S. foreign policy interests. And they seem to have won, at least, in a small measure in both countries now.
That has happened. So the U.S. has got their grubby paws in there.
Yeah, they've gotten their grubby paws in there, and they have won at least a partial victory so far in both countries. Okay. Because they were targeting they were targeting prime ministers in both countries, and prime ministers in both countries have since resigned and stepped down, leaving caretaker governments. And they wanted to see both of these prime ministers gone.
They did. The United States wanted Iran.
Yes.
Who was the prime minister in Iran?
Iraq, you're talking.
Iraq, excuse me.
Not
I'm
Iran.
sorry.
Yeah.
He was Iranian friendly. He was a Shia, right?
He was a Shia. But the prime minister of Iraq, right? He was prime minister for only a couple years, not even quite 2 years. Adel Abel Mahdi.
Yes.
And he was viewed as a moderate. Okay, he was Shia, but he big thing was trying to keep a balance in Iraqi foreign policy between Iran and the United States, and not completely side with either one. Try to have balanced politics, which, if you are an Iraqi prime minister, that would seem to be the logical thing to do, right?
Absolutely.
A lot of people in your country look for inspiration, across the border to Shia in Iran, right? Thank the U.S. Invasion, occupation, and overthrowing Saddam's government to give them a democratic country where a Shia majority would want closer relations with Shia Iran. You have natural ties in Iraq, the Shia people there with the Shia in Iran. A lot of people, have sympathy, right? So Iraq and Iran don't hate each other anymore.
They never really hated each other to begin with. It was us propping up our dictator and Saddam Hussein. I mean, a lot of people, they have to realize that Iraq got rid of our chosen guy in the first place. So, there he is.
No longer useful, no longer playing by the pipes that the U.S. was playing.
Yeah.
Now, that is the U.S.'s fault. It has created what they call now this arc of Shia influence coming out of Iran through Iraq, through Syria and Lebanon and into the Mediterranean, and threatening Israel, which Israeli security and Saudi Arabia is what this is all about, right? Yeah. The U.S. seeks to control the Middle East. Their hegemony is a tripod. The U.S. at the top with Israel and Saudi Arabia, its two principal allies below. Uh-huh. And for religious reasons, with Saudi Arabia, it's Wahhabist Sunni, right? Iran is Shia. So there's the eternal Shia-Sunni conflict there. And with Israel, it's all about Iranian support for Palestine, despite Palestinians being Sunni and Iranians being the majority of Iranians being Shia. Iran has always supported Palestinian statehood and Palestinian independence from Israeli occupation and ongoing ethnic cleansing. So the U.S. is basically in conflict with Iran because of the security interests of Saudi Arabia and Israel. Mm-hmm. And that is the reality of the Middle East. And this is behind all the conflicts there. This U.S. and always subtitled Saudi-Israel conflict, these local protests and local politics in both Lebanon and Iraq are a battleground for U.S. and Iranian influence. And that is exactly what is happening in both countries. Now, both Lebanon and Iraq have fixed ethnic, religious, sectarian political systems.
Yes.
They have ethno-religiously divided societies, right? They have, particularly in Lebanon, they have Christians. They have a large Christian population. They have Sunnis. They have Shia. They do have some Jews, some other minority peoples there. And the same thing in Iraq. The division is different. They've got a Shia majority. They've got Sunnis. They've got Kurds. And then they've got a number of other smaller minorities. These people, when they go to vote in democratic elections, their political identity is still largely formed along these ethno-religious and clan lines. So they vote for Shias, often vote for other Shias, right?
Yeah.
Christians in Lebanon vote for Christians, so on.
Yeah.
The problem when we've had the export of a winner-take-all Western-style liberal democratic system to these countries is that then you would have a permanent majority based on those ethno-religious lines. You would have permanently disenfranchised minorities, and that would breed resentment and domestic unrest and political instability. So both countries have these systems that establish quotas, right, in the parliaments and governments, that so many people have to be from this ethno-religious faction. So many people have to be from that ethno-religious faction.
That's in Lebanon now, right?
Both countries, but Lebanon Iraq? To an even greater degree. In Lebanon, the president, by constitution, has to be a Christian Maronite. The prime minister has to be a Sunni Muslim, and the speaker of parliament has to be a Shia Muslim. That's their constitution. That's the way they keep the peace in Lebanon. In Iraq, the exact formulation is different, but it's similar in that they have the way parliament is divided up and the way seats in the government. The Kurds have to have so many seats and so many positions with the government and so on. And this breeds problems, right? It solves one problem, the problem of permanently disenfranchised minorities.
Absolutely.
But the result is you have warlords or clan leaders of these various groups who use the states for their own enrichment, corruption, right?
Yep.
And providing services for the whole country mean nothing to them. They don't think of the country, right? They think of their own ethno-political, religious, sectarian group. They want more money that allows them to run a system of patronage and clientelism for, to keep their immediate followers supporting them in the country. And solving one problem creates another problem. And this is why these protests in both countries are largely over economic problems, right? Okay. Poverty, lack of jobs, corruption, and the government not being able to provide basic services. That's true in both countries. In Lebanon, the latest protests this year were the kind of the straw that broke the camel's back scenario was actually an internet services tax. They wanted to put a tax.
This is on Lebanon, right?
This is on Lebanon. The government wanted to put a tax on calls made via a popular media internet app, WhatsApp.
Right? Yeah,
because people were making the calls through there, not using the normal phone system, and the government was losing revenue. And the government is bleeding, right, in Lebanon. Why? First of all, they don't have a great economy to begin with, but this has been exacerbated in recent years because of U.S. sanctions. U.S. sanctions
in Lebanon.
In Lebanon,
Jesus, yes. Is there a country we're not sanctioning?
Yeah, no. So the first problem with the sanctions is sanctions on Syria, right?
Yeah.
Because Lebanon does a lot of business with Syria, right? They're right next, they're right next to each other.
Yeah.
The border, to some extent, is even artificial, and the continued war and sanctions on Syria prevent Lebanon from being able to do any real business with their own closest geopolitical, next door neighbor. Second of all, the U.S. has huge sanctions on Hezbollah.
Yes.
Hezbollah, of course, is a major political party and social movement in Lebanon, right? They support Palestinian resistance. They are continually fighting against Israeli incursions into southern Lebanon, into, complaining about Israeli incursions into Lebanese airspace and so on. And they receive support from Iran and previously Syria. So which makes them, the U.S. calls, this is why the U.S. calls Iran the biggest supporter of terrorism in the world, right? Because they support Hezbollah.
Yeah.
And Hezbollah, unfortunately, is a major elected democratic party, as well as a social movement and militant groups in Lebanon. Why? Because Hezbollah also does a huge amount for the poor people, particularly the Shia in southern Lebanon.
Yeah.
And resisting Israel and supporting Palestine is also extremely popular in the world. Is Hezbollah guilty of terrorism? Right? If you start talking about that, is Hezbollah terrorists, they'll immediately pull you all the way back to an incident in the early 1980s with a barracks bombing that Hezbollah may not have actually been involved in anyway, but that's the closest example of real terrorism. We're splitting hairs here,
Mark, is what you would say. We're splitting hairs here. You can call us a terrorist nation if you want.
Going back decades.
Yeah,
right?
I know.
Someone was fighting U.S. military occupation of Lebanon, and it's not actually clear that it was Hezbollah, maybe someone who had sympathies with them and so on. But that's how far they have to go back to find an example of what we would call terrorism with Hezbollah. The rest is all simply military resistance to Lebanon.
Yeah.
But the U.S. sanctions against Hezbollah, they are now sanctioning Lebanese banks to try to prevent them from doing business with Hezbollah. And again, Hezbollah is a major social movement that provides foods and services that the government doesn't provide to the people of southern Lebanon. So you're actually impoverishing a large segment of the population of Lebanon by doing this. You're preventing the poor from getting the benefits that Hezbollah would, regularly provides. That's part of what they do. So the banks have to stop working. The bank has caused a banking crisis in Lebanon, which caused a financial crisis, which caused the Lebanese economy to tank even further than they already were, unemployment to increase, protests in the street. The Lebanese government tries to find revenue by taxing WhatsApp. Straw that broke the camel's back, and the protesters take to the streets with renewed vengeance. And the prime minister, who is a moderate and a Sunni Muslim, the prime minister of Lebanon was Saad Hariri. He also happens to be a Saudi citizen and a citizen of one or two other countries as well. He's a little, not quite a billionaire, kind of what do you call 100 millionaire?
Yeah.
He's a rich guy. He was briefly kidnapped by Saudi Arabia.
I remember this.
Held in Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia actually announced that he would be resigning.
Yep.
That never ended up happening. Macron may have actually stepped in and helped get him out. He also has French citizenship,
Yeah.
That's the
I
reason
remember
why.
this whole situation.
And it was all over that he cooperates with Hezbollah. There's two big political blocs in Lebanon. The March 8th movement, of which is the majority, slight majority, which Hezbollah is a part of, and the March 14th movement, which Prime Minister Hariri's more Western-leaning party is a member of. But because Hezbollah and its partners in the FPM, a Christian group, yes, Hezbollah is partnered with Christians in Lebanon. Deal with it. And the Amal movement, which is a independent Shia political movement. They're the Hezbollah's partners. They have a slight majority. But because the prime minister has to be a Sunni Muslim, that's how you end up with a power-sharing government where, despite Hezbollah and its partners having a majority, the opposite coalition actually has the prime ministership and thus the government. It's finally balanced. And the U.S. got tired of Hariri maintaining this balance. So, and the U.S. was quite open about this. All right, in recent congressional testimony, this was it's reported in Brookings, of course. The former U.S. ambassador to Lebanon, Jeffrey Feltman, his congressional testimony is included in this Brookings report. What's next for Lebanon? Examining the implications of current protests. And he says right during that congressional testimony that the protests in Lebanon now coincide with U.S. foreign policy interests, and they should be encouraged because the U.S. wanted to get rid of the prime minister there and replace him with someone who is more antagonistic to Hezbollah and not interested in maintaining the balance, because they want Hezbollah out of a power-sharing agreement in the government itself. Again, the U.S. is always keen to encourage democratic elections in another country until, like in Palestine and Lebanon, those elections come back and the people say they want Hamas and Hezbollah. Then they don't like the results so much.
Mark, hold on one second. You're frozen real quick. What we're going to show this quick video, and then we're going to call you right back because I want to get you on because there's some important information. I think the people will have to realize out there that Hezbollah is not going away in Lebanon whatsoever. The people in the United States need to realize that. It's a social movement over there. Hezbollah has been something special for them. Like you said, they do a lot of work with poor people. Let's show this quick video we have that was on RT. It's 2 minutes and 30 seconds. And while we're showing that, we're going to do a real quick call back because I want to get you back on so we can finish up this show properly, okay? All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we've had some technical difficulties on the other end. I really wanted to finish up the show really well. I mean, we were talking about Lebanon. We were talking about Iraq, what's going on over there, ladies and gentlemen, and there's a lot of stuff to unpack. You know, there seems to be a push by the United States government to get rid of Hezbollah and try to drive them out of Lebanon. But like I said, it's not happening. And Mark was kind of talking about the approval ratings from the poor people in Hezbollah. And I've talked to some people when it comes to Hezbollah. They are not going anywhere. They are wanted there. They are not terrorists. They are just an organized group trying to do things in a proper way. And they've always stood by the Palestinians and other groups that have been repressed in that area. Unfortunately, we can't get him back on. We've been trying to get him back on. We're going to have to finish on out of here. We'll try one last time here, see if Mark can get on. There's Mark.
There we go.
Can you see me?
I can see you now.
Okay, so we were just about to end the show. Whoa, thank God you came back on. So we showed that video, what was going on. Now, pretty much what we're talking about, Hezbollah. The United States is trying to make a push to get Hezbollah out of Lebanon.
Now,
it's not going to happen.
No, it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Hezbollah was, particularly their working class base, was once a part of the protests, right? Because they're also protesting against neoliberalism and corruption and the failure to provide jobs for the large numbers of unemployed young men and so on. But eventually it became clear as the U.S. backed, again, National Endowment for Democracy backed and political parties were joining and taking over the protests, that the U.S. wanted the prime minister, who previously was seen as really a pro-U.S. creature, basically, to resign because he wasn't being anti-Hezbollah enough. So then Hezbollah started opposing the protests, right, with their leader, Nasrallah, speaking against them in a way that, you know, we have demand, you know, the protesters have demands, but we can't let this politically divide us and divide Shia Muslims from Christians and so on. Here's the thing. With the prime minister resigning, that leaves a caretaker government facing new elections. And Hezbollah does not want to run Lebanese government. They don't want power. They don't want complete power, because it would fall to them to form a new government. They don't want to form a new government. They realize that the U.S. would use that as an excuse to level even more sanctions against Lebanon, crippling Lebanon's economy even further and trying to divide wedges between the Shias, who are part of Hezbollah, and other ethno-religious groups in Lebanon. Hezbollah does not want to run the government. They find it better to be partners with a majority, or with not a majority, but a minority government that is actually running the country, so it doesn't expose the country to much political damage from the United States and their allied countries. And that's a little bit complicated and hard for a lot of people to understand, but even though Hezbollah could and should form the next government, they don't want to. Now, here's the problem with elections to break the deadlock and form a new government, is that Lebanon's constitution, again, allocates certain seats to certain ethno-religious groups, so many to the Christian, to these Christians, so many to that Christian, so many to that Christians, so many to the Shias, so many to the Sunnis, a couple to the Jewish, and down the line. But these are all the numbers, the quotas are all based on census that is decades old and is no representative makeup of Lebanon in the slightest. So if you were to have a new census and a new quotas thus derived, the Christians would be vastly have their political power reduced, because their proportion of the Lebanese population has gone down substantially since then. You would see the Shia make gains. You'd see the Sunni make some gains. You'd see the Christians go down. That would break the existing political balance. Here's the problem. The Lebanese people want political change. Without political change that will bring further political division that would lead to more civil conflict in Lebanon, something they don't want to return to.
Okay.
And you can't, unfortunately, really get one without the other. The prime minister has stepped down. It's unsure under what conditions, if new elections will be held, or what the new government. But without changing the political structure, you're not going to get real changes.
Okay. Isn't there
So
a chance, though? Isn't there
What?
a chance we can this whole system can be scrapped? Let me throw something at you real quick, Mark, because I have a friend from Iran and I talk to him, and he tells me all the time that the worst thing the United States can do is put sanctions upon Iran, because there's always been a movement of young people, and I see a lot of young people in these protests in Lebanon, in Iraq, that
first of all, that young protests or young people are always the basis for all protests in any country, everywhere. That is always true. It is true in the United States, as it is in Iran, as it is in Germany, as it is in Russia, because young people are often more politically idealistic, and they don't have things such as families and jobs and things that tie them down and might prevent them from protesting.
Yeah. And also, let's face it, and a lot of times they get screwed the most. A lot of our policies in the United States are made for the older generation to hold on to their money. Capital gains tax is a lot less tax. My mom gets taxed a lot less on her capital gains than I do on my salary, and my salary is 1/10 of what she makes in the market every year. But that's beside the point. The friend of mine told me that there is this civil unrest with the theocracy that's still holding power, especially like in countries like Iran. Is it possible that there is this young movement just to get rid of this theocracy altogether and maybe move forward in another way where they don't have to live in this old, outdated system that is so radical? Maybe they're a little bit more modernized, and this can take hold in Lebanon and Iraq? Is it possible?
Okay. All right, so Iran is a completely different political situation, even though Iran has influence and is instrumental to what happens in Lebanon and Iraq and conflict with the U.S. because of the large in Hezbollah is supported by Iran and so on. But the problem is this extremist Shia government in Iran that you're talking about is in many ways probably more leftish than what a young alternative inevitably supported by the United States might turn out to be. And Iran is also a firm part of, the resistance to Israeli, Saudi, and U.S. hegemony in the Middle East and around the world. So it's not quite as clear cut on left-right lines as you might like to think. And a revolution by the young against other interests in any of these countries, a lot of people like the idea, the sound of it, but revolutions don't always result in good things.
Yeah.
And the only way to have a real revolution in Lebanon and Iraq is if you removed the complete political structures. Both prime ministers in both countries have stepped down, right?
Yep.
Change satisfied according to, the idea of the way parliamentary democracy works. Except that's not really going to change things because of the political structure. If you wiped out the political structure and had elections, just free elections, without any in place, you would then have permanently disenfranchised minorities because people would still vote on ethno-political divides and the Christians would be a minority in Lebanon, and you have the Sunni Shia population left competing. In Iraq, it would be the Shia automatically winning elections and automatically winning control of the government every time. That would lead to political unrest of a different sort, not based on bad economic conditions and corruption, but based on ethno-political divide, which is potentially far more and hard to come back from. And Iraq has so many times been at this point where it is about to break up along ethno-religious lines, with the Kurds often supported by the U.S. And the KRG party there going their own way with the oil and separating from the rest of Iraq, with the Shia and the Sunni locked in conflict. Are largely intermixed along a certain area, a southern area. You would have the same thing in Lebanon in a return to civil conflict. Sometimes a bad status quo is better than a potentially far more explosive revolutionary change.
And I got questions. I want to
be afraid of getting what you.
You're breaking up. You there? Can I hear you?
Yeah,
I
I'm
missed
here.
the last
hear
sentence. You're breaking up. I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know, Mark. I'm just, when I see these protests and I see what's going on, I see these people, looking a lot more like us. You know what I'm saying? Wearing a lot of the same clothes, having the same kind of mentality. I don't know, like kind of just like, I would think the information age would give us a chance and an opportunity to change, and that we would be able to break away from this theocratical hold, and I would hope for the same for the people of Iraq, for the people of Lebanon. I follow Sarah Abdullah on Twitter, and I see her talk about, hey, hands off USA. This is all about us. So I guess that I'm hoping for something new to really spawn out of this and come out of this. I don't always want to say that, a change is going to lead back to something that could be worse. And yeah, the potential for us to go back, not for us, but the potential for Iraq or Lebanon to sink deeper into a more hostile country, the opportunity is there. But do you see any light for anything positive to come out of this? I mean, maybe the dancing got to me, but I don't know. I thought I saw maybe there was an avenue of people just striking down this theocracy and maybe moving forward in another way.
Well, Iran does have, quote, a theocracy, although it actually has a far more complicated political system than it is often described in the United States, far more certain religious guidelines. But did you know that there are Jews in the Iranian parliament?
Of course I know
that there are Christians in the Iranian. Yeah. Okay,
that.
So,
but the number of Jews that are living in Iran now is shrunk over the last 10 years tenfold. It's not like it used to be.
Now, I would not call Iran a complete democracy, but if you take Iranian democracy and compare it to the U.S. allies in Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Bahrain, they look like democratic, pluralistic saints.
Yeah.
in comparison. And that should tell you something. So don't ever believe the U.S. when they say they want to bring a democracy to a country, when their biggest allies and partners in the Middle East are the absolute Wahhabist terror-spawning dictatorships in Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Bahrain.
Absolutely.
The U.S. government is happy with these protests in Lebanon and Iraq. Again, different situation, although, of course, connected to Iran. And the U.S., particularly the neocons, are happy that both prime ministerships, the prime ministers in both countries have resigned. And now there is chaos and transitional governments and nothing is clear about the political future in each country. That makes the neocons in the U.S. happy, and that should give you pause and throw a little bit of water into the idea of, democracy, protesters, young protesters dancing in the streets. It's not always a good thing, and you need to look at these things with a realist and more cynical eye.
Yeah, I hear you. I'm just hoping. Well, we know in Iraq it's about oil, correct? What is it about in Lebanon? Is it all just about Iraq, destabilization again?
Iraq, yeah, it's a big part about oil, but it's also about geopolitical position. And in both countries, the U.S. involvement in both countries is always about Iran, as is the U.S. entire position in Syria, right? It's in Syria to weaken Iran. And why do we want to weaken Iran? Because Israel and Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
And should we be fighting wars and backing protests and meddling and overthrowing governments and destabilizing governments in Lebanon and Iraq and Syria because of Saudi and Israeli interests in against Iran? I mean, yeah. is that a good thing for the U.S. taxpayer? Is that really in what is in American interests? Because we've seen what happens when carefully balanced governments in these countries fall apart. In Syria, when the government lost control over large parts of the country, ISIS came in out of Iraq, where they were birthed, and filled the power vacuum. Iran, or Al-Qaeda, now controls the entirety of Idlib province. We're partnered with U.S.-backed sectarian militants in that country, and got arms and funding and everything else, through one implausible degree of separation there. The U.S. was, Tulsi is right, was de facto backing Al-Qaeda in Syria. And that was destroying a more secular but authoritarian, multi-ethnic, multi-confessional republic in Syria.
Yeah.
And that has had destabilizing effects on both Lebanon and Iraq, as have the sanctions, the war there, hurting the economies, giving those young people, reason to be out in the streets protesting the immiserment of their lives for economic reasons and the feeling of political futility and impotence. And there are good reasons for all of it, but good reasons could be pushed and most likely will be pushed in a bad direction. Change is not always good.
Have you ever heard of the Litani River in Lebanon?
I have.
Okay. Is there interest for Israel to exacerbate, to inflame the situation, to maybe one time go up and get a hold of that river over there? Because at one point, I think the Zionists had planned to have the Litani River up to the Litani River as part of northern Israel. Do you still see a play for them to go after that?
Water is always a big interest for Israel, not just in the land it's gobbling up in Palestine, control of the water resources there, but in Lebanon and even in Syria as well, right? It is not the number one factor, but it's always a factor. And there is always the potential. And we know that the Zionists in charge in Israel, and even if Netanyahu is replaced, his replacement might be even more militant.
I know, right? I knew you were going to say that. I knew you were going to say that.
Unfortunately, it's true. He's a former military commander, and he's promised to be harder on Gaza than Netanyahu was. Right? That's Israeli politics. So with the U.S. encouraging by Israel, by recognizing Jerusalem, moving their embassy there, recognizing the Syrian Golan Heights being annexed by Israel and saying that's Israeli territory, and continuing to support Israel with tens of billions of dollars, U.S. taxpayer dollars, of arms and financial aid a year, you are encouraging Israel to think more greater Israel and resources in Lebanon and Syria, which they could be further encouraged, to try to land grab. Yes,
yeah,
it's a possibility.
I think it's something we have to pay attention to. I had some people kind of leak that information to me that the Litani River might be up for grabs with Lebanon being unstable. Zionists once had northern Israel go all the way up there, and it's a very big source of not only just fresh water resources, currents, they're using it for energy, but it's something to keep an eye on. Mark, thank you so much for joining us here today. I really apologize to all the people out there for the technical difficulties we had. It seems like we had a great stream, a lot of great things to talk about. And Mark, like always, you were on the money, and thank you so much for not only educating me, but my audience and everybody else out there for listening. You'll come back and do it again soon?
I will, and I just want to say, quick before I go, it's always about following the right local people. If you want to follow what's happening in Lebanon, follow Amal Saad on Twitter. Amal Saad, she's a political science professor at university, the Lebanese University in Lebanon. She's a solid lefty, and you would really learn a lot from her about what's really happening in Lebanon and Lebanese politics. It's at Amal Saad _ LB.
AMAL, by the way.
SAAD _ LB.
Spell it one more time. Saad. One more time, spell it.
Amal Saad. AMAL SAAD _ LB.
Got it.
Right. I'll send you the link. Follow her on Twitter. And you'll get an insight that you wouldn't otherwise have into Lebanese politics and what's actually happening on the ground in Beirut and elsewhere in the region.
We got it up there. Amal Saad, political science professor at the Lebanese University, working on a book, Hezbollah's Post-Resistance from the National Resistance to Regional Power. Thank you so much, Mark Sleboda. It's always fun to talk with you, man. I love these late-night sessions. Ladies and gentlemen, like, share, subscribe. Mark, where can they find you? We always put your Twitter up. Anywhere else we can look for you?
Twitter, Facebook, and I'm all over the political radio shows and Sputnik.
Yes, you are.
Almost weekly, and whoever else gives me a call.
Squids McCracken said, sure he isn't a Russian agent? We don't know, but we love Mark Sleboda either way, Mark.
It says right on my Twitter, if you take a look on my Twitter and my Facebook, at my cover picture, it says very clearly in butchered Cyrillic, Russian asset, proud and unrepentant.
We see it up there. It's great. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining the Convo Couch late night. What's that, buddy?
Right up there with Tulsi on that one.
Yeah, the Convo Couch, Mark Sleboda, Tulsi Gabbard, all Russian assets. Thank you again for joining us, everybody. Late Night Foreign Policy Junkies with my main man, Mark Sleboda. We love talking to him. Johnny Sue on the ones and two for Pasta Jardula. Convo out, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. If you have some money, a few bucks, go to our Patreon. Help us out. We can always use the love. See you soon.
Fort Pasta.